Martin, sorry for that interruption. Would you be able to just answer that again, please?
All it was to say is that it's not actually procurement that deal with the management of the procurement cards anymore. It's actually business support. So while procurement can give you an overview on the process and the systems in place, it's business support you would have to go to if you wanted any specific direction on the processes, systems and how that's being monitored and measured.
Thank you. I'm not sure where we go with inviting them to meet with us or speak to us, but I think it's definitely one to be considered for the future. And perhaps we can pick that up at our next monthly meeting, Richard? Yes. Yeah? Thank you. Super. Any other questions? No. Item 9 then is the counter fraud update. Richard, are you doing that or is Tracy?
I'll kick off and then Tracy will pick up on a few of the items in there as well. Thanks, Chair. This is our usual update for committee around key issues around the National Fraud Initiative, anything to do with counter-fraud issues such as bribery, money laundering, that type of thing. A quick overview as well of some of the things that have come through under whistleblowing and anything around the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. First thing is the NFI is in full swing at the moment. As you can see there in Table 1, that's a number of matches that we've had that we are investigating. As it says there in paragraph 4.2, to date, 1,838 of the matches have been processed. I mean, it's one of these things with NFI is that we're trying to process all these, and it's down to individual departments who are the people that operate these services that are trying to do that as well as do their normal job as well. So it does take a bit of time. We do get quite a bit of pressure from the Cabinet Office and the NFI team as to, you're not working quick enough on some of these. But we've been doing NFI now for 25 years, isn't it? So we're very knowledgeable on what we need to be looking at. And certainly myself and Tracy have an overview of what's going on. And Tracy's team do get involved in certain areas of it anyway, as do some of my team. So we know where things are and we know how to manage these. And the other thing, of course, is we quite often get contacts from other local authorities or public services organisations with matches that they've got that match to something in our authority. So it's quite in-depth at times, but it requires people to manage both sides of their job and also trying to pick up all these, looking at fraud issues as well. I'll hand over, what I'll probably do is just pick up and then hand over to Tracy on the counter-fraud team. If I move down to 4.10 on paragraph 4, page 4, we've got the whistleblowing disclosures that have come in this year. There's been 5 so far. I can't go into too much detail because sometimes it will identify individuals from this. So I just do an overview of things. In a lot of cases, as you can see, 2 have been completed. Another one should be completed today. We are just having a final look at that one. We've spoken to management on that, and there's no issues coming out of that one. That's case number 22-1. So that should be, we should be drawing a line under that one today. There's been nothing under money laundering, nothing under bribery, and the same under RIPA, Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. So there's nothing much coming out of there. What I'll do now is hand over to Tracy for to take you through what her team do.
Thank you, Chair. Just to give an overview of what's been happening within the counter-fraud team. We've been extremely busy supporting colleagues in various service areas such as housing, social care and parking, in addition to undertaking the work that we do for DWP under their single point of contact service and the data matching that Richard has alluded to there through the NFI. We have been heavily involved in administering the business grant scheme, and whilst the payments for the scheme actually ended in July, we're now in the post-payment phase of that scheme. So we'll be doing the post-payment check-in and any debt recovery that comes out of that. So that's going to be a significant piece of work that's going to be ongoing in the coming months and indeed years, because the debt recovery programme from that scheme can run into 2 years. So that's going to be a piece of work going forward, I think, for the team. We are back to business as usual, following reinstatement of in-person interviewing and visiting. So we're now able to undertake the proactive work that we normally do for Derby Homes. So that's a really pleasing piece of news. And I'm also pleased to report the outcomes that we've got that are detailed there in Appendix 1. I think it demonstrates the determination of the team to progress matters despite the restrictions we've had because of the pandemic, and that our resources have been used, particularly in the first 3 months of this financial year, primarily on administering the business grant scheme. So thank you. I'm pleased to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks, Tracy. Members of the... Oh, gosh. That's all at once. Stuart.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you to Richard and colleagues for this report. Saving of £650,000, I think, is no mean feat, not least for 3.2 FTEs to generate that. So it's certainly very positive indeed. My question is just about, in 4.4, the fourth bullet point there, around the counter fraud team, and it's working understanding emerging fraud risks. Just wonder through you, Chair, if we might have a little more on quite what that looks like. How do the counter fraud team do that? And perhaps how do they then feed that up in terms of the knowledge that's generated to the senior officers? Thank you.
One of the things we have, we're part of the National Anti-Fraud Network, and they will issue alerts for any emerging fraud risks. And they're issued on a nationwide basis. The majority of local authorities in the country are now part of the NAFN network. So we will receive those alerts and we will then forward them on to either our communications team for onward dissemination, or if it relates to a specific service area, and we've had one this week that relates to payroll fraud, I would direct that directly to the person that it would need to go through in that service area. So that's one of the things we do around emerging fraud risks. The other thing, of course, is, as we know, we've done the business support grants. They're an emerging fraud risk there because it was a scheme that had to be dealt with at pace. So we're aware we put a lot of checks and balances in place at the beginning, but nevertheless, there will be an element where there will be an emerging fraud risk from that scheme by virtue of the pace it was delivered at. So those we would certainly be looking at, and they're also dealt with through the National Fraud Initiative because we've data matched our data against the rest of the country as well.
Thanks, Tracy. Does that answer your question, Stuart? Did you have any other questions, or was it just that? Thank you. Councillor Bettany.
Thank you, Chair. I was just listening to what you said, and you said something, I think you did, about parking. Would that be illegal use of blue badges?
No, Councillor, on this occasion it's not about blue badges, it's about ordinary parking tickets, and we've currently got an investigation that is ongoing and could well result in a criminal matter. So at this point in time I'm not able to disclose the detail of it, but once that's come to fruition that will be in the public domain. Thank you.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. The first one is just following up the grants. I'm presuming it's the COVID-19 business grants that you're following up. And this is obviously a time when people will still be alert to that. So I wondered if you've been doing any publicity to encourage people to help you in that task from members of the public, because I've had people who've grumbled at me non-specifically and saying that these are very generous grants and some people are going for them and they shouldn't have been. So I think there's an opportunity there that if we've not got anything out in social media, for example.
I think that's a really good point, Councillor, and that's certainly something we'll take on board and have a look at.
Because sometimes people get really hot under the collar because we're neglecting in our due diligence and they don't know what to do about it. So.
Yeah, we have had some reports from members of the public, but I think that's a really good point, that it would be good to get some comms out as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. The other thing, two things I wanted to raise is the housing recoveries and the work that we've been doing with Derby Homes. I think that is really valuable, not just from the point of view of Derby Homes, but from the point of view of our housing waiting list. And from a point of view of our housing waiting list, it isn't just Derby Homes we need to be conscious of, but all the other social housing providers. And I don't know what they do in terms of this level of diligence before they respond to purchases, or they have got potentially those sublettings going on. So if they're not doing it, is that something that we could look at and offer as a support to them?
It is actually something, Councillor, we did pick up just prior to the pandemic, and we had interest from a couple of the housing associations to undertake work for them, which we are going to be picking up again now that we're back to business as usual. One of the other things as well is we chair the East Midlands Fraud Group. That was a forum that we set up here at Derby City Council, and we do have attendees on that group from social housing providers. So any emerging fraud risks or anything we can assist them with, they're discussed at that forum. Thank you.
That's good news as well. And finally, it's something I was going to say in terms of the whistleblowing. One of the whistleblowing points there is a failure for senior managers to be following procedures. And I'm a bit conscious of this because as I come into this building, I know we have procedures for COVID safety. And I really don't know why I have to come up in the lift, to the extent to which I said, why do I have to come up in the lift, and try to get someone to review it? And it's been reviewed, and you're now allowed to have 2 people in the lift, which doesn't solve my problem, the fact I want to walk up the stairs. But it makes me conscious that I have that responsibility to be following these stupid arrows around the building rather than to be going just where I want. Even if the room's empty, I should still follow the arrows because I should be seen to be doing the right thing. And I just wonder if that is the issue. And we need, if these are not working for senior managers, then the senior managers should be asking, like me, can we have this reviewed, please? So could we have a review, please? And make sure that we're doing the right thing so I don't feel so annoyed when I have to come up in the lift.
I'm not sure who's best placed to answer the question about the stupid arrows, but Simon's putting his hand up.
Unfortunately, I'm the person who's responsible for ensuring our messaging on COVID security. The stupid arrows are all mitigations to minimise contact alongside bubbling and all the other aspects. I have had to occasionally tell staff that their proximity is leading to a business continuity as well as a personal contact and circulation risk. So I'm sure Councillor Kerr, out of all the councillors, will make sure that she is compliant until the corporate message changes. However, I think the important thing here is that what Richard picks up as whistleblowing and sometimes this, we're an agile organisation and we should be constantly reviewing our both policies, procedures and the way that people can make suggestions. As I think Tracy says, some of that intelligence you would get through association of just meeting people and getting that, we're slowly getting back into that way of working, and we need to pick up that intelligence because we want to be agile and efficient and effective. And if any councillor, not just Councillor Kerr, has that suggestion, please bring it to me or any of the council staff here, and we will progress it. But thank you for your compliance, Councillor Kerr.
I think just to follow up from that one, and I'm not asking for answers because I don't want to jeopardise anything, but is there a process within the whistleblowing policy for such policies and procedures that are identified as perhaps not working, even though they're not being adhered to be investigated and changed?
Yes, there is, but I think I would just caution the fact that some people are trying to use whistleblowing when, for example, there's a grievance and disciplinary, and we have to make sure that whistleblowing, which is by itself a serious issue we need to take into account as in the spirit of the Whistleblowing Act. Whistleblowing by itself saying there could be a improvement in procedure as opposed to whistleblowing that there's been fraudulent activity, safeguarding issue, any other aspects. I think we've got to be careful we don't expand it to have every complaint through here, and we are managing what we would call, I won't say that inappropriate use of a whistleblowing policy alongside some of our other processes, especially around grievance, disciplinary, which is well documented in terms of our procedure. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Simon. Just before Richard comes in, at 4.11 it does say the whistleblowing policy is currently under review. Will there be something looked at in that maybe signposts people towards grievances rather than whistleblowing?
Yes, Chair. That's one of the things we want to do the review of is that reviews being picked up by the legal department, but I've been in touch with HR because we had as Simon said, we had a number of cases recently where grievance procedure has turned into people whistleblowing. The very clever ones decide to, rather than call it whistleblowing, call it qualifying or qualified disclosures, which then brings into account, you know, how we have to look at that. The interesting thing is, though, what we need to look at from a whistleblowing perspective is it in the public interest? In a lot of these cases, it's personal interest, and that's why it shouldn't really be, although it gets logged down under whistleblowing because it's been made through the whistleblowing policy, the response to the whistleblower is usually around, but this is a personal interest matter, not a public interest matter. Just to pick up on this 22.3, this case here, it's got safeguarding issues, hence why it's coming through under whistleblowing. And we've got a link through there that if it is safeguarding involved anywhere, then the relevant safeguarding officer for either adults or for children has to be contacted first of all, rather than it go through. They will then decide whether it goes through and what investigations are done.
Thanks, Richard. Councillor Kerr, was that all of your points covered?
Yeah, that's everything. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Philip.
Just one thing that's not there, unless I missed it. Do we have any connections, links with police, either us giving them information or vice versa, on a regular basis, which things that might not end up in a police investigation, but might end up in a local investigation? Is there any connection there? Should there be any?
I'll put this up, but I'm sure Tracy will have a comment or two to make as well on this, but because both Tracy and I do have quite a bit of involvement with the police. It has changed over the years. Several years ago, I had a named contact at Derby Constabulary certainly from the Economic Crime Unit and anything to do with fraud, where we just contacted them and then they would speak with us. Now, our role is we have to take things through the switchboard to the certain number, and then it gets allocated, so you'll then get contact by the police, and they'll then see if it's something they want to pick up. But I know Tracy's got a different arrangement with the police.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, Chair, please. We do have direct links with Derbyshire Constabulary in respect of modern slavery, trafficking, and we would also pick up ad hoc data protection requests from the police, from officers that we have worked with in the past in certain areas. So we have those links. If we have a case that we believe would be better placed with the police as a criminal matter, we have contacts there where we would refer those cases to. If it's a fraud case, they do have to go through Action Fraud, because that's the protocol we have to use. So they would be reported through Action Fraud, but we would follow that up with the constabulary directly. Thank you.
It was just that in a previous life, I found something which I thought was a fraud and mentioned it to the police, and they said, well, do a bit more digging around and then we'll pick it up for you. So I had to do a bit more work. They were basically passing the buck back to me. So I did a bit more work and passed it back to them, and sure enough, it did end up in a prosecution. But, you know, I suppose it depends on case-for-case basis from what you're saying, Tracy.
It is, and you do find that it will depend on the value involved in certain instances and the level of intelligence that you're passing on in the first instance. Because obviously they've all got priorities to deal with, so low-level cases may not get dealt with in the same way we would hope, but certainly if we can add any strength to the referral that we make, then we do. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? No, okay. Item 10 is, I've lost my screen, is EY's audit letter. So Hassan or Vishal, I don't know who's starting this one. Hassan?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the audit results report. So first of all, just taking you through our executive summary, which I'll mainly be speaking through. First page of our executive summary, page 5, provides an update in the scope, being changes to the engagement leader for the audit, and also some additional procedures that we've been undertaking in relation to COVID-19, particularly on information produced by entity and the use of Microsoft Teams. The microphone not working, is it? Maybe I'll speak a bit louder if that'll be helpful. Then moving on to page 6 of the report. So page 6 outlines the status of our audit. So when this report was issued, it highlights there the procedures which we had yet to conclude on. If I run through those in order. So first of all, in relation to IS19 assurances, we are waiting for the pension fund audit to be complete. There are differences which have been highlighted to us by the pension fund auditor, but they've also outlined that their work has yet to be concluded in terms of the testing that they're undertaking. In respect of valuation, property, plant and equipment, I'll pick that up on the next page because it's split out into two areas. On group accounts, we met with the component auditors last week, and our work in that area is completed. In relation to assessment of going concern, management's assessment of going concern, we've looked at the information provided. We're satisfied with the position that's been kind of reported. However, we've yet to go through our internal EY consultation processes in respect of going concern. And the next point there on value for money arrangements, I'll pick up when we're discussing the value for money section of the report. There's just one area where work is where we've yet to conclude on our work. And then the other points listed within the on page 6 are points which would complete just at the conclusion stage of the audit. On page 7, we outline the findings and the status of our work. So we highlight there under point 1. So these are risks which were identified within the audit, our audit plan, which are provided in more detail in section 2 of this report. But on point 1, risk of fraud in revenue recognition, we've just identified one adjustment which relates to prepayment of pensions in the component in the subsidiaries accounts, and the accounts have been adjusted to include the £2.4 million. On point 2, we haven't identified any findings to report. On point 3, valuation of the car park, we're now satisfied with the valuation that as is reported within the council's financial statements, so that issue is now closed. Point 4, we highlight that we'd engaged our PFI experts to undertake a review of the accounting model. We haven't identified any issues. Section or point 5 there outlines that the work on the pension scheme audit is yet to be concluded. However, at the point where the pension fund auditor reported back to us, they did highlight that based on the work that they'd undertaken to date, there was a 24.6 million adjustment in terms of the valuation of assets, and the share of the council's share of that, we've kind of estimated it to be £4.5 million, but we will revisit the position once the pension fund audit has been completed. And on point 6, we outline that we've just got some additional queries which we've recently raised to management in respect of the SINFIN. So we're just going to go through the responses from management before concluding in that particular area, which also relates to a point on the value for money conclusion, because one of the risks that we identified was relating to the capital programme. So once we've concluded on that side, then we'll be in a position to conclude on the value for money conclusion. I wasn't proposing to go through section 2 of the report in any detail because it just provides more context to the points which I've just highlighted within the executive summary, but happy to take any questions if there are any questions. Section 3 of our report provides members with the proposed audit opinion, subject to the conclusion of the outstanding areas. Section 4, we highlight the differences that have occurred during the course of the audit to date. So there's the 2.4 million difference which I referred to earlier, and also the 4.5 million which relates to the estimated share of the council's share of the pension fund assets. In addition to that, there are a number of disclosure amendments which are listed there on the within section 4 of our report. And on value for money, section 5, so we have a responsibility to report on the arrangements under 3 specified criteria. And just looking at the arrangements that the council has put in place. In our audit plan, we identified 3 risks which we've reviewed as part of the audit. We're yet to conclude on the monitoring of the capital programme in terms of the arrangements to work effectively with partners in relation to SEND and the financial sustainability. We're satisfied with the arrangements that are in place in those areas. I'll pause there and happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Hassan. Simon, did you want to come in before I open this to questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The ISA 260 is important that you consider the findings of the external auditor before signing off the final accounts. This committee has expressed concern in the audit last year and this audit about the timeliness of the audit process to report to those charged with governance, and Ernst & Young will realise that we had hoped to receive the final audit concluded by the end of September. We got assurances about the completion to this committee. At this stage, as you said, there are some areas on here that you've closed down, some areas which are still to be closed down. But the value for money judgment, which is the subsidiary to the statement of accounts, though there was discretion in the sort of relaxation, if you want to call it, of the audit regulations, the fact that will not be received until 2022 and considered by this committee, I think weakens the role of governance in terms of you reporting on our governance arrangements for value for money and everything else. So I suppose as the professional officer, I am disappointed that this audit is not complete in a timely fashion for the second year. I understand some of the dependencies with the pension fund audit, which is out of the control, but other items, and in our pre-meeting with the chair, we felt that we just wanted to say that despite the problems that we know are in the external audit market, the fact that accounts are produced in June and we cannot still get absolute assurance by November is not satisfactory to the ratepayers of Derby in terms of them being able to get that assurance on the arrangements we have for financial reporting and financial governance. So I've said the same to yourself as the lead auditor, that this is disappointing that we still have not got a final audit. And I suppose one question I'd ask on behalf of the committee is, thank you for the ISA 260, but it still requires to get to the end point where you are able to issue your opinion. So what is the current status of when you think an opinion, both from the financial reporting and the statement and the value for money judgment, might be issued? Thank you.
Hassan, would you like to come back to that before I go to members?
Yeah, sure. So subject to, we are nearing conclusions, so there aren't a long list of items outstanding. Subject to the responses which we're receiving, I'd expect it to be our work to be concluded within a couple of weeks in terms of the timescale. But that is subject to whatever we receive. In relation to the value for money conclusion, just to outline to members that we're required to provide a commentary in our annual auditors report. So the annual auditors report, I suppose, effectively replaces the what was the annual audit letter. So, and then we, in terms of preparing that commentary, obviously we need to prepare the commentary once the work has been concluded. We can issue our opinion as long as we're satisfied that there are no significant weaknesses in arrangements, because that's what we need to conclude on.
Thank you. Does that answer your question for now, Simon?
Yes, it's just one of my roles as your strategic director is to make sure that reports come in a timely fashion to those charged with governance, and I am concerned that one of the key assessments of which members, especially this committee, would have of the annual governance statement, the fact that in November, following a financial year 7 months on, we still cannot receive the reports that would give your external assessment of our scheme of governance, our scheme of controls, our financial reporting. It is difficult when we are committed as a council to try and produce these accounts in a timely fashion. So I think it's really, and we might pick it up in the last item, which is the renewal of external audit and the adequacy of the external audit market, not EY. This late reporting from where we were as a committee, getting into that steady state of earlier reporting, it doesn't increase risks, but it just doesn't allow us to discharge our role of those charged with governance. And I know you will hear this from many clients. But yes, thank you for your honest explanation. And can I then confirm that your annual auditor report, you're scheduled to bring in January, is it, Hassan?
Yeah, so on the conclusion of the audit, we will have our annual auditor's report prepared, and if the next meeting is January, so that's the meeting which the report will go to.
Thank you both. Members of the committee, Philip.
Number of things, really. Just looking at your executive summary, the long list of conclude this, that and the other. Is your failure to conclude that a matter of the fact that the information was not available? Is it the fact that the council staff were not available to give you your answers? Or is it the fact that you didn't have the staff around to do it, to do the work? Because a number of action items within that thing, as Simon's been a bit more... no, I'll withdraw that comment. The issues that you raised there, a lot of the issues that have not been done could have been done a long time ago. They're not dependent on the final accounts being produced. Quite clearly, to have the final accounts produced on time, which we did, time which the staff did an excellent job here, and Simon, we'd mentioned that at the last meeting. It is disappointing that we're not able to sign off these accounts promptly, start straight afterwards. So it's really a general comment. Whose issue is it, this failure to conclude? Is it an issue here? Is it an issue of information? Or is it an issue with yourselves and your staff? And you mentioned just a minute ago something would be available. I didn't quite catch what it was. In a couple of weeks. Could we have a bit more explanation of what a couple of weeks might be? A bit more exact date. Thank you.
So taking the first point in terms of where, you know, whose camp does it lie in. So it's there are elements where it's to do with our consideration and our team, but there's also cases where there are issues that have arisen where we've gone back to ask for additional information. And on the point in terms of the pension fund audit, then we're obviously waiting for another party to complete their procedures. In respect of the couple of weeks, that's particularly the one area which is outstanding on the where we've got queries in relation to SINFIN. So I was saying that once we've reviewed the information that's coming back there, if we haven't got any issues arising from that, then I would expect it to be concluded within a period of 2 weeks, which is 2 weeks from now.
I could just come back on that. I mean, the issue on the SINFIN contingent liability point, I mean, I raised that point with Simon some while ago when I did a quick review of the accounts, and he gave me an explanation. So it's not exactly rocket science, that one, raising that as a contingent liability. The issue of the pensions happens every year. That's not an issue that, in a sense, there's limited action we can take here because it's dealt with by the pension fund auditors. So it strikes me there's still a lot of work there that could have been done at an earlier stage but hasn't been. And as you're asking for significant increases in fees, I'm wondering whether it's justified, these significant increases in fees, because this work could have been done somewhat earlier and hasn't been. It's an open question, really.
So, well, in terms of the work, I think there's comments been made already in terms of as a market as a whole. There's significant challenges facing the audit market as a whole, particularly in relation to public sector audit. PSA reported fairly recently that 9% of audits across the country were completed by the end of September. So I think that position kind of highlights to members the context of the audit market as it currently is. In relation to fees, the discussions on fees are, you know, what is an appropriate fee to undertake an audit of an organisation of the size of Derby City Council. It's you know, the starting point isn't correct in terms of the audit fees, rather than the, you know, should there be additional fees for the work that's currently being undertaken.
In addition to the 9% of audits being completed, it was also reported in the press the other day that an EY partner had just received the record amount of pay of £749,000 a year. I wonder if perhaps they need to look at their own internal arrangements and perhaps reduce their costs.
Any other questions from committee members? Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, I think it's true that the financial sector needs to consider the market, and there are many areas at the moment which there is a shortage of skilled people, and I think this is just another of them, which is something that the whole country needs to work through. But we are where we are, and we have to do our best going forward. But if there are things that we need to do as politicians in the political sphere in terms of influencing the way in which the whole of the audit market works nationally, I think that needs to be discussed and shared so that we can put pressure on the government for changes that will actually make it work better. Because to not have an analysis of last year's accounts when we are very much looking forward to next year's budget isn't helpful either. I think we can aspire to do better as we did a few years ago, but we're not getting there yet. this has the point, my computer's just gone to sleep again, but there was a consideration, particularly here, on the pension liability and the council's response to the disparity there. And I just wondered if there was a response back from that. I'm wondering whether, you know, in terms of our responsibility for the pensions, very sadly, we're seeing about a third of the people who are currently dying across the country are dying from COVID. So the liabilities on the pension fund is probably falling in line with that. Really, really sad statistic. So it may be that that is a reason why it's not being looked at, but there may be other reasons as well. But Simon, you might tell us.
Just in terms of pension fund audit, it is an incredibly complex area, and there's a whole aspect of factors that taken into account: interest rates, discount factors, life expectancy, and everything else. Obviously, this is an assessment primarily at the point of the 31st of March, but we recognise that the regulatory requirements around pension reporting probably have increased, and though you say there could have been a reduction, unfortunately, of workforce due to COVID, you've got to remember the pension fund is there over a much longer period than a shock, a one-year shock in the system arising from a pandemic. I think, as Hassan will confirm, where they have to rely on another audit firm who audit the pension fund to get their assurance to satisfy the audit here, that is of equal frustration, I'm aware, to EY as a firm, that aspect, which in reality, we've had problems for a number of years with Mazars auditing the Derbyshire Pension Fund in their timeliness, has led to some of the delays that we're experiencing here. So even if all the other aspects have been closed down, Hassan would not have been able to issue his opinion or whatever with that still outstanding. So my point is not so much about the pension fund, which is out of control. It's about those items, as our independent member Philip has mentioned, which could have been picked up as part of the audit process quicker, so we could have more confidence, if you want to call it, that the only outstanding issue was an assurance from the pension fund audit. And I think that would have given more comfort to the committee instead of a list of outstanding items. Thank you, Chair.
So, Chair, where it states that, we ask that the rationale as to why the misstatement in the pension fund, which would relate to 4.5 million for the City Council, is not corrected. Have we got a reason for that?
Part of the audit is that we have productive discussions with the audit firm around those that we will adjust and those that we will not adjust. There's a requirement, and I'm sure Hassan will say, that if we decide that we will not adjust, the auditor needs to bring it to the committee's attention so you can consider whether that is appropriate. Our view is that the size of this potential variation, our share of it, which is seen as a proportion of the total pension fund valuation, is not material. And Pete Shilcock, who's behind me, and Tony Nash and myself are taking the view that we would not recommend to the committee that we adjust it, because we do not see it as material. But if you want to ask that question to Hassan about why he's recommending it, then you can form a view, then whether you feel that it's our professional opinion is right and the accounts can be signed off on that basis. So I don't know if you want to ask that question of Hassan.
Yeah, so Simon's correct. We've got to report any potential misstatements which are above our reporting threshold, which is what we're doing within this report. If the figure in terms of the difference gets to a level which is above our materiality threshold, then that would have a potentially have an impact on, well, it will have an impact on our opinion on the financial statements. At this moment in time, that difference, and it is an estimated difference, is above our reporting threshold but below our materiality level. So if management and then the audit committee decides that they agree with management that it shouldn't be adjusted, then we would ask for the reasons to be outlined within the letter of representation.
I mean, you said what your reporting threshold is and what your materiality threshold, and it lies in between that band, yes? So why do you think it should be altered? You still haven't explained exactly why you think it needs to be altered. We've heard from Simon. Simon's explained what you think.
Because it's a difference that has been identified within the pension fund statement of accounts. We need to then consider what impact that might have on Derby City's accounts, and the difference is of a significant amount which we would recommend that the accounts be adjusted for. But if they're not adjusted, it is below our materiality level, so it wouldn't then be interpreted as a material misstatement within the financial statements.
Yeah, it's not material. I mean, I don't think we're disagreeing with that one, but I'm still not quite sure why it should be altered.
Because the pension fund itself is pension fund auditors reporting that the valuation of the pension fund assets are misstated, and then within the Derby City's Council's accounts, it is reported what the share of Derby City's Council's share of those assets are. And we're highlighting to the Audit Committee, the Audit and Governance Committee, that the estimated share of that difference is £4.5 million. So we're highlighting that it's a significant number. You know, you should consider amending your accounts for that number. But if you choose not to, on the basis of materiality, we'd also understand that position.
Can we ask how this disparity has arisen? Is it a matter of timing or different sets of papers at some point?
When we're producing the pensions fund notes, obviously we secure an actuarial valuation which reflects to the Derby City Council share of the pension fund. And as I said, it picks up all these assumptions which we have to be happy around the assumptions in it, and then will be tested by external audit. So in May, we do that assessment and we produce for relevant disclosure notes. Obviously then Mazars, as the auditor of Derbyshire Pension Fund, go in and look at in more detail at the whole makeup of a pension fund, the rates used, the sort of how much is in gilts, equities, everything else around the pension fund. They have carried it out and made recommendations to the pension fund that the valuation needs to be restated. As Hassan has said, we have a share of the pension fund liability, but it's our view that when we have a look at that in the materiality of our balance sheets, is that we do not have to adjust it for what's highlighted, and at the moment it is an estimate. If we've got to be honest, the pension fund swings between year on year, which are proper accounting swings due to how it's calculated, means that we don't feel that it's material in the restatement as of 31st of March 2021 that we have to amend the accounts. So that's my judgment as your treasurer, that the accounts have been produced with that not being adjusted. But as I explained, you need to hear the ISA 260 is from Ernst & Young for their opinion to be passed to the committee. And if the committee felt that actually they disagreed with me and they wanted me to consider amending that, I'd take that on board prior to signing it with the chair at the point that we can sign it. So it's one of these discussions we should be having, but my advice to you is that we don't have to make it, and as Hassan says, he's got to bring it to our attention, but he's not saying it's material that it would be then, in the opinion, that it would be sort of a, that the council should, in inverted commas, change it.
Thank you for that. And I'm one of the council's appointees onto the Pension Fund Committee. And I fully accept that these valuations change not just from year to year, but from week to week and probably day to day in some cases. So it is an estimate, and I'm happy that it's there listed as an estimate, and we just have to be conscious that it is dependent on timing and the world, really. So I'm happy that we can leave it as it is, personally. Other members of the committee might have opinions as well.
Thanks, Councillor Kerr. Yeah, sure.
Sorry, what Lucia says is exactly right. It is the materiality. It is an estimate. It is at a point in time. Today, it may be different. It inevitably will be different today if we looked at it again today. So this is a point of time, an estimate at a point of time. The assets of the pension fund, I'm not sure what they are these days, but several billion, I would think. And you're talking about, we know what the assets, we know what the size of the budget of this place is. So in those terms, is it material to the way in which the council works on the basis it is based on an estimate at a point in time? I would agree with Lucy, no.
Thank you both. Any other comments on that particular item? No? Any other comments on anything else on this item? No? My only comment, Hassan, is something that I've raised before. We've had some issues in the past with audit results where I have raised that it looks like areas have been copy and pasted into reports, and that hasn't happened for quite some time. But something else that I have raised in relation to item 6 on the Sinfin waste plant, Sinfin is a place name, and as such should all be lowercase apart from the initial S. It's not an amalgamation of two words. If we can get that changed to show that you know what you're talking about, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Have you, Simon, agreed the fee? Is there any issues around the fee? Well, we haven't actually talked about that so far.
Right. The ISA 260, as well as any of the audit letters, will notify us of the core fee for an authority of this size, plus any variations for works either identified by the risk profile or, if you want to call it, nationally work. So last year there was areas for going concern, for example, that we need to have. But what is also important here, and I know Helen Henshaw mentioned it and Hassan would mention it, is that in the table, which is at the back of the report, it also talks about what would be a reasonable audit fee for an audit of this size. And I know I've recommended to this committee that I don't think the amount that we pay for audit on the fee scale nationally is enough for the firms to actually satisfy all the requirements here. So you'll see a memo item on that table effectively of what is a reasonable fee for this audit. That doesn't get charged to us, but there is a process through public sector audit, PSSA, public sector audit, the framework for any fee variations to be put in by EY for us to draft comments. We've recently had an assessment by them for the last financial year. It's a process that EY should be discussing these with ourselves as the client, myself and the chair, prior to those going in, so we can form an opinion. And I know we've had that discussion in respect of the 1920 financial audits that we had, and we would expect similar discussions, but they should be discussed as we go through, not as a retrospective look. So this gives you an indication of the fees, but they will evolve as we conclude this audit and in discussions with EY. Thank you.
Just on that, what is the planned fee? 32,000 non-audit services. What's that?
I'll ask Ernst & Young to give you a breakdown of that, Philip.
So that's outlined on page. Put my glasses on page 32 of the reports. They relate to certification of the housing benefit subsidy claim, teachers' pensions, and pooling of housing capital receipts.
Oh, I see. Just that. Oh, that's that figure there. Sorry, I thought it was something on top of that. There you are.
Any other questions, Philip, or are you happy for now? Yeah? Super, thank you. Moving on then, item 11 is the audited financial statements, and that will be Simon.
Thank you. And as I explained, that you have to consider this report, which is effectively to approve the audited financial statements, taking into account the ISA 260 and any commentary or advice that Hassan has given earlier. But just to highlight that what you've got attached here is the statement of accounts following any of the changes that we did agree, mainly around disclosure notes and everything else. And I'm pleased that we're able to bring you what we would think is the 99.8% complete set of accounts. And on the same side that I've challenged about the timeliness of the audit, I think the engagement with the audit, and especially Vishal, has been, in a COVID world, a good relationship. So thank you for that. So what we've got here is the statement of accounts. The recommendation is to approve it, but in approving it, you should also put on your audit and governance hat and say what questions, what queries, what assurances you wish from signing off this final set of accounts. So you may have questions to us at myself or Pete Shilcock, who's the group accountant, who is the person who coordinates and produces this account. So again, thank you, Pete, for marshalling the team and the council to produce these within the 2 months, so they were available for audit in June. So ask us any questions, and then because the ISA 260 is not fully complete yet, and there could be still some changes, not anticipating there will be, that you delegate authority for final approval of the financial statements to myself and the Chair of Audit and Governance, so Councillor West. Both of us have to sign the accounts and issue the letter of representation at the point of audit, the statements being finalised. And just to note, for completeness, that I will sign the letter of representation, which is detailed in the ISA 260 in sort of a draft form. I think I'm right there, or I might be wrong, so Hassan will confirm, but I need to send the letter of representation at the point of the audit being signed. So hopefully you'll see it's a good work. It gives a narrative of our financial position. Evidence is, in my view, strong financial reporting, but we're happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Members of the committee? Councillor Cath.
It's not so much a detailed question, but a philosophical question, in that the Derby Homes are dealing with a lot more than just the housing revenue account these days, and their provision of some of the services will be effectively audited from their perspective rather than from our perspective. And it's really the question about how we look at that, and do we think that that gives a clear indication about what is going on in terms of councils, the provision of council mainstream services by others, or whether there's something more work that we need to do to make sure that that's interface and shared responsibility is clear?
There's a technical and there's a philosophical answer to that. Obviously, the ELMO is required to be reported as part of our group accounts. you're aware from being on the chair on the board of Derby Homes, their auditors are BDO, which will look at the mix between what they provide for us as a HRA and what other provision they're having. We're also aware that Derby Homes are a very integral part of the council, especially in areas like homelessness and everything else, but that isn't under the remit of the financial reporting, but more how our local authority controlled company, which is effectively what the Elmo is, can work with us to achieve the best outcomes for the city. So I think probably what is interesting, one of the amendments we had was from the BDO audit of Derby Homes that required us to amend our consolidated group accounts. And I think one of the areas that I've been discussing with the team is how we ensure that we undertake more assurance as they produce their accounts to make sure that any interrelationship in terms of financial reporting, we've sought assurances because we rely on that information to consolidate our overall statement of accounts. Sorry, I've knocked the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That gives me the reassurance that we're looking at that interface more than we have done in the past, I think is what you're saying, Simon. And I think that that is healthy because they are taking on additional roles, and obviously this coming year there will also be the neighbourhoods agenda into that as well. So I think that's timely.
Thanks, Councillor Kerr. Any other questions? Philip?
Just to reiterate, really, I've not gone through all 162 pages again. So, sorry, Simon, I can't resist it when I see a set of accounts. I know it's sad, but I did produce a list, a schedule, which I think of questions which were answered, some which were detailed. Thank you very much to all the accountants who answered that on a timely basis. I'm assuming they're all the changes that were agreed were in there, so I haven't actually gone back and checked them all. That's his job over there, not mine. But I think that the fact that we've got a set of accounts on time, which have been looked at by a number of people, is a tribute to the organisation and the staff that produce it. And I think the committee needs to recognise that and accept that and give our thanks to Simon and all his staff for doing so. Thank you, Simon, on my behalf. Anyway.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, if we can have that noted, Dom, our thanks and appreciation. Following on from that, I haven't read all 160 pages again. What has jumped out at me this time is on page 110 relating to members' allowances. It says that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, all council meetings in 2020-21 have been held virtually, which has led to a reduction in travel expenses. The table above says that £15,000 of expenses were paid in 1920, which I do find hard to believe, but it does suggest that £15,000 of travel expenses were previously paid out when our place of work is the council house. So travel expenses shouldn't have reduced for council meetings, and I just wanted some quantification on that. Sorry, Pete.
So that, yes, the travel expenses will be for all members' visits around the city, whatever they're doing. So the fact that the meetings are held virtually is one thing, but obviously you've got expenses for, travelling for various meetings around the city, perhaps meetings at LGA, things like that. So there's all sorts of different travel expenses that covers, not just obviously within the council house, obviously.
Thank you. As someone who's never claimed expenses, it's never occurred to me that other people would claim £15,000 off. Councillor Kerr.
I think we're not supposed to claim expenses from within the city, but if you're going to a meeting at Matlock, for example, or you've got a meeting in London, if you're a cabinet member and you're meeting somebody or lobbying, I think that's what that 15,000 is. Any other questions on that item? No?
Thank you. Item 12 is contract waivers, and I will hand over to Linda.
Thank you, Chair. This report this time covers a period of 9 months. Obviously, we do get quite a variation in the period that we're reporting on, which is why we introduced a quarterly comparison further down the report so that we could see that we were comparing like for like. The numbers of avoidable waivers did peak in the April to June period. Not surprising given it's the start of a financial year and people are trying to put things in place quickly. And so what we've done as per normal is do a report on what we classed as avoidable waivers. And I've gone down the list to get some further information on some of the higher value waivers, just to give an overview of why they came about and hopefully preempt any questions that might arise. So if we start at the top of the list with the £80,000 traffic signal maintenance, that was a waiver that was done to enable a proper process to be run. And the reason that it was done was because actually our previous provider went into liquidation, so we had to move very quickly to put something in place to allow us to go back out to the market. So quite understandable. What we need to learn and be smarter with, I think, is how we actually class these waivers, because there is an argument that says that that could have been unavoidable because obviously our provider had gone into liquidation, so we had to do something. And that's a point I'll raise on a couple of others on this list as well. So I think a lesson learned there is that we need to actually qualify better how we classify the waivers and put that explanation into this report for the next committee meeting so that we all know how we're classifying the waivers. The next item, which was the pedestrian crossing refurbishments, was actually for the supply of the equipment required, and it had to be done via waiver because of the lead time of that equipment and the fact that the works had to be carried out during the school holidays. Obviously, so that because the crossings are used more when the children are at school. So that again is perfectly explainable. The frightening one, the one that looks like it is a lot of money, £1.3 million. Just like to explain to committee that that's actually a works contract, so we're not waiving public regulations because the threshold for works is over 5 million. So it's actually our own processes that we're waiving, hence it's on this waiver report. And this is actually a variation to our PFI contract, and we have waived it to be able to do this work as part of that contract so that the assets being worked on aren't removed from the PFI arrangement and the council doesn't therefore become responsible for that asset. Now, again, this is one where the classification perhaps could have been unavoidable because we wouldn't want to go outside of the PFI to do such works. And again, hopefully that'll be addressed at the next report. The next item I'm looking at is the preparation of a master plan for an area within the city referred to as the cultural heart. This is again around the area around the marketplace, Market Hall, that whole section there. And the works were done via a waiver so that we could use the consultants Bennett's, which had done previous work on reports around the city and obviously have the local expertise, but also because there was an supposed urgency around the need of the work because it needed to feed into the business case for the long-term development of the assembly rooms. So that's the further detail on that one. The next big ticket item is the item that refers to catering staff recruitment. Now, I'm going to read a statement out that I have actually, a friend of mine prepared for me. This is linked to the outcomes of work done by internal audit and the counter-fraud team. The head of internal audit has outlined the ongoing work in this area to committee and will provide an update when it's prudent to do so. So at this point in time, I have nothing to add other than to report the waiver in line with contract procedure rules. The building maintenance remote monitoring system, which is waiver reference number W21003, done by waiver because we extended an existing contract where the available extensions had already been used, but done through negotiation so that we've actually managed to extend into 2023 at the 2015 rates. So obviously it made financial sense to do it and it was able to be waived through a departmental waiver. The next two items, which refer to a project manager and a project supervisor, both relate to the property projects and technical services area, where those of you who have been on this committee for a number of years will know we really struggle to recruit and maintain staff. And these are done via waiver because we have to go to agencies that we don't have contracts with to enable to secure people to actually carry out these roles. The first one actually, the construction project manager, is because we're having to cover maternity leave. You know, if we do manage to get someone in place, then we have to backfill their post for whatever reason. Then I think there's a piece of work that needs to be done to address this, but it's been a problem for a number of years now. The lift consultant is to enable us to extend a contract that was originally put in place via a framework. This consultant has been in place within the council since 2014. And unfortunately we couldn't go back to the same framework to reappoint because that wasn't an option open to us. That framework hadn't been renewed. So this extension has been done via waiver to enable us to keep that expertise available to us. I've not got many more, promise. The business intelligence item, which is W21035, the second item on the last page. This was to retain the consultant that originally completed the data strategy. Obviously, this is ongoing work for us to become an intelligence-led council. And so this is the second phase of the works. Obviously, this one was classed as avoidable because we would have expected provision to be made in the previous one for a second phase of work that wasn't done. £70,000, the best interest assessor. This is again extending a contract to allow us to complete a statutory requirement. This is around adult social care, not my area of expertise, so I apologise, I don't really understand a lot of it, but it's about the deprivation of liberty safeguard assessments that have to be done, and we don't have an internal resource to do it. This is to allow us to go out to the marketplace, but I understand there's been some change in the requirements of those assessments, so we've done the waiver to allow us to make sure that our specifications are as up to date as it can be to go out to the market. The transition project is to enable us to use Derby College for support to post-16 students that have educational, health and care plans in place. And obviously it's funded work and it's a fixed term piece of funding. So it makes sense for us to use a waiver to use an external body rather than try and actually recruit for the short period of time that this funding covers. And then last but by no means least, the digital transfer equipment. This is very simplified, but because BT are doing all the digital updates, a lot of the equipment we have is becoming obsolete because it won't work on the digital network. And this £90,000 was enable us to do the initial urgent items, but there is, I think, a cabinet report might even be the next cabinet report to allow us to actually spend the money to go out and for the whole, to cover the whole of Derby, but that was just the initial expense required. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for the work that you've put in at our request to go and get some extra detail on those. I think it really does help. That last item makes full sense to me now, because I've had a resident who had just that problem, that their equipment wasn't working, and BT came out and said, we can't fix this because it's too old and we don't work with this anymore. And I think also, yes, we do need to do a little bit of work on some of the things that don't necessarily need to come to us for this list, the things that are waivers but are waivers for different reasons. I think we have always sort of been really concerned about the items that have been rushed through and could have been planned better, or certainly, as you well know, that's always been my issue. I will open that to questions. I think Councillor Kerr had indicated.
Yes, thank you. And I wanted to ask about the item at the top of page 5 and bring out of that a wider issue. Specification of production for Snelsmore Grange Primary School. It's quite small, but it means that it's rather than our team doing this, it was other people doing this specification. When it went to Planning Committee, one of the things that was asked about it was the appropriateness for looking at it when we have declared a climate emergency, in that it was only being constructed to close to standard building standards. It wasn't being looked at a system that would be future-proofed. And that wasn't being challenged by the staff in education either. Now, they've obviously been given, they must have been given some outline specification by ourselves for the school that was then going out to final design. So there's a question here about whether we are briefing our consultants sufficiently to achieve what we as a council would be hoping to achieve. And the bigger question there is whether there is actually any evaluation of the quality of outcomes when waivers have been used and when not. Now, that would be an enormous piece of work, but this is just an example of where the result of this, which went through planning, was a disappointment. And had we done it in-house, it might still have been a disappointment, but it might have been easier to challenge it and to explain it being differently. And there may be other examples like that that could be drawn out of others in this list if we had an opportunity of seeing the outcome from some of them. Is it something that we should be aware of? Is it something that it's worth doing more work on?
I think to save Linda answering some of that, there definitely has to be a case for a bit more joined-up working across the council. You know, we sit on a lot of the same committees and see a lot of the same things, but you know, there are resolutions and motions passed at full council which take a long time to feed their way down to the relevant committees, and then there are potentially other officers that aren't aware of those items. There definitely has to be a bigger piece of working together and everybody following the same procedures, but I'm a bit of a loss as to how that happens when so many departments work in sort of silos and don't relate to other departments. Linda, if you have any words of wisdom on that one, please do chip in.
I really don't, other than what I was going to say is because we're actually waiving the procurement process, the procurement team actually don't get involved with these. It's departmental led, which obviously leads us back to the silo working, etc. I mean, there always has been a concern as to what communications happened and actually what terms and conditions are in place as well when a procurement process isn't followed. But I would have said that was an enormous piece of work to undertake. To give some comfort, it will probably be touched upon with the spending review that we're doing for the contract savings piece of work through the smarter working and the contract management piece of work, because one of the things that will come out of that is a more comprehensive contract register and an actual list of contract managers. And we put waivers onto the contract register because they are a contract just with a different name. So hopefully we've got steps in place that will start to address that. Obviously we're doing, the initial piece of work is to try and fill Simon's piggy bank with our contract savings in the first instance, but hopefully that should lead on to other things.
I don't know whether Richard might have comments or Simon might have comments, but it's definitely something that needs to be addressed.
I've not got any particular comments at the moment, Chair.
I was going to let Richard provide some comments, so we'll pick up the observation and just consider it a bit more.
Thank you.
Chair.
Any other questions for Linda? No. I think it's something that we can also pick up at the training. We've got training booked on the 24th. Is that right? I think that's right. Yeah, same day as full council. And just to stress that we've asked for the training for members so that we can give procurement the support that we feel it needs and deserves. So very much for us to be able to offer you a bit of backup, as we have done with internal audit over the last couple of years. So yeah, very much looking forward to that. Thanks, Linda. Councillor Grimmerdell, I know you need to leave soon, so please do when we need to. We won't be much longer. Item 13 is the minute extract from the CYP review board. Excuse me, we did ask Councillor Lynn to come and talk about this, but she is struggling with childcare at the moment. She has her children off on half term. So I will put to the committee my sort of suggestion after speaking to Councillor Lind and to Simon, that internal audit are due to undertake internal audit of SEND during Q4, and that we suggest that a small sort of working group with myself, possibly Councillor Willoughby, Councillor Lind, Simon and Richard is put together under whatever item it will be under the terms of reference, but to commission work from internal audit with the approval of Simon, to address this matter in a bit more detail. If any of the members of the committee have any questions or comments, please do make them, but that would be my suggestion, that we put this to internal audit to review in their planned audit in Q4. Councillor Kerr?
I think, Chair, that sounds fine, but because I think it does need some more work. But the papers that have been circulated suggest that the need for a change in this instance was accepted by the Cabinet member. And I just wondered what the process would be to formalise that change, and whether it's something that we can actually just check has happened, assuming that there's some sort of process there. But it also made me think that are there other times when there is potentially a conflict of interest between, most likely, planning and licensing, and there's could be a reputation or potentially even a financial risk because the authority is wearing different hats at different times, and they can collide, which is, I think, is what has happened here.
Simon?
I'm not sure I exactly understood the extrapolation you made from what the papers are here. I'm aware that the Children and Young People's Board and Andy Smith, as a strategic director, went and gave assurances which I believe were accepted by the CYP board. I don't know if any members are here or on there. And I think one of the comments we would make is that when we're developing a plan, obviously there'll be a series of registered settings that we will be, which may be registered or in the process of being registered, which we may wish to sort of use for young people. And but I think the CYP board, if I'm picking up the right question, got assurance that the named setting in the name setting was not in the final ECHP, so it was more of a sort of a development and consideration point. But without Councillor Lynn being here to provide more explanation of what assurance and governance that she was hoping the Audit and Governance Committee would provide, it was felt that maybe adding it to our existing SEND audit and just having that as a risk that the audit will consider would then allow this committee to have a right assurance. So I know I haven't answered your question because I didn't exactly understand how the point that you're extrapolating, but happy to discuss it offline if you want.
Chair, may I just come back? Because I think there's whether or not the particular school ended up listed in the final EHCP is immaterial, because a school that does not yet exist shouldn't have been on the short list of possibilities if it hasn't got planning and hasn't got Ofsted approval. So somehow a school that hadn't existed was being considered as a possibility. And so it's the procedure that says these schools exist, we can consider them, that seems to have needed to be looked at. And there may be other implications where there are schemes in place, and I can't think of a specific one, where we know that there is likely to be a new facility, could be within adult social care maybe, that people may be able to go to, but it isn't actually in existence, but which officers could be saying, oh, this would be an excellent match for somebody, but it doesn't exist. But because we're seeking to use it, it may seem to be putting pressure on planning to approve it or for licensing to license it. So that's my concern, that we don't presume that something is there, and then when the council says actually that's not appropriate for that location, it might be embarrassing to us. And I can see that coming up. For example, we've got a number of small both children's homes and care facilities for adults with learning difficulties around in the city. And those can be quite contentious going through planning. So to have people already expected to go to that facility before it exists could be an issue. So it's those sorts of things that I just think we need to be mindful of, and making sure that our processes are appropriate.
Yeah, we thank you just for that clarification, and Richard and the audit managers will consider that in designing the risk and scope of that particular audit, so thank you for that.
I think there's then the potential for that to feed in as other feedback from internal audit has done and gone to sort of resolve other projects or be used to look at other projects. So the A52 works that sort of then had an implication for the assembly rooms scheme, for instance. But I think it's that putting that in place in the first place, isn't it, to say that this is a potential issue, for it to then come back to us and work out where we go with it next. So unless we needed to do anything else on that, if everybody's happy with the recommendation that goes to internal audits plan. I see nods. This is good. Thank you. The last item then is the late item, which is off my screen, the Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, which we mentioned at the last meeting, and for Simon to discuss.
Okay. As the Chair mentioned, we signposted that we'd be bringing a report to this committee. In essence, back in from the Council and Audit Regulations in 2015, and there was an opportunity for local authorities to either procure their own audit or to enter in a sort of collective framework type procurement in with a body called the PSSA, Public Sector Audit Appointments, and that was initially for a period of 5 years. I think we have had many discussions in this committee and indeed today about the struggles that the external audit market have had, especially over the past couple of years, in discharging the audits in a timely fashion within the resources available to fulfil the audits in time with the accounts and audit regulations. And Hassan quite honestly said only 9% of audits had been concluded by the end of September. So you might ask here, well, why is our recommendation that we keep within this framework? Firstly, I think there's a real important role which was recognised by the Redmond Review and everything else that we've also discussed of the role of quality external audit, and we will get that through collective procurement, not through necessarily individual procurement. I think there's a merit in local authorities and the PSSA as the not-for-profit company consulting with the local authorities to ensure quality of audit and quality of audit engagement is achieved. I think there is something that, having experienced the past 5 years, it would be interesting on the number of bidders and the spread and the geographical spread and market share that will come out of the next procurement. But I feel more secure securing it through the framework than I do trying to locally procure an individual audit of auditors with the right skills and everything else, which the main players like EY, Mazars and Grant Thornton have. So I think we will get better quality audit from this. And I suppose finally it's about that recognition from this committee that the important thing about the next audit period is that we get high quality external audit delivered to providers with the assurance we need, which we know in terms of regulation, in terms of the volatility of the public sector, in terms of changes that will come nationally and regionally going forward. We want good quality, high quality external audit. So the recommendation is that this committee recommends to full council that we opt in, as we did back in 2016, into the public sector audit appointments procurement to appoint an external auditor from the 1st of April 2023. PSS, public sector audit appointments will allocate the auditor based on both making sure split across the country in terms of market share, and also they would come to us asking whether there is any reason of the person they want to appoint to us should not be appointed, and that could be conflict of interest, or they're an auditor of a subsidiary company, or anything else. So it doesn't mean that EY will carry on as the auditor. They will have to decide whether they want to procure, but it doesn't mean that they won't, and that's in discussion with PSSA after this. And finally, the council has, under the regulations, has to make this decision by the 9th of March, I think it is. Hence why it's coming here, and then it will be picked up at the next scheduled council. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Any questions from members? Councillor Kerr?
It's, the introduction sort of half answered this in that you were suggesting that effectively Derby Homes ought to have a different auditor to ourselves. Is that true?
Derby Homes are currently audited by BDO, and we're currently audited by EY. There is, and it would be interesting to get review of an audit practice here, but there is a view that sometimes this different people auditing different parts of the local government framework, whether that be your company or whether it be the pension fund, is creating inherent tension in maybe all authorities within a pension fund area, and whether you should have the same audit firm auditing and getting assurance on say all the bits that contribute to the council's financial reporting. Having said that, there's a lot of merit of the check and balance of different assurances that you get from different parts being audited. So maybe, Hassan, you're closer to the national negotiations, but what is your view about whether going forward you'll see more regional groupings, or whether it be as now more of a lot process? Thank you.
Haven't actually heard in terms of how PSA are intending to go out to the market in detail. I think there are obviously advantages and disadvantages with whichever option that they decide to go for. I think your question, Councillor, was in relation to the audit of Derby Homes, the subsidiary. I think there can be benefits to having the same auditor for auditing the parent and components in terms of the audit process, but there are also issues in terms of fees that may come into play in relation to the potential audit fees for a components or subsidiary audit, which would need to be considered.
I was asking this because Derby Homes is looking at its audit at the moment, its new auditors, and it might be just worth a conversation to see whether there is a common interest there or not.
Like, I'm more than happy for maybe the chair of the audit committee, Ian MacDonald, is it, at Derby Homes, and for Councillor West, maybe to have that discussion. It hasn't caused any problems in the past, and it is for the board of Derby Homes to determine their own auditor. But we can have that discussion, Councillor West.
And from the point of view of, I know it's likely to be going out to the market fairly soon, so it might be talking to somebody on the officer front as well, which might be David Endicott, or it might be somebody else as he is moving out of the front line at the moment.
Philip?
Just to come back on what Simon said earlier about good quality assurance, and perhaps we ought to add in the word timely as well in any correspondence we have with PSA about future audits. I have to say, moving on to another aspect, I'm aware that a number of audits of the 2021 accounts haven't even been started yet. So, in that sense, as we're quite well served. At least we've started the audit, even though they haven't finished it. And I know there is considerable disquiet across a number of sectors about the way in which PSA packaged up the work in the past. And there is talk about going outside on a block basis for a number of authorities within certain sectors. There is an inherent danger in that, as Simon has recognised. I certainly wouldn't recommend Derby going out on its own to go for a thing, only if we could be part of a local package or something, but I'm not sure that would ever happen, to be honest. So I think that's just, quite frankly, a non-starter. But so I think sticking with PSAA is really the only option.
Any other comments from members? Or are we happy to agree with that recommendation? Yeah, I see nodding and no questions. Then yes, we will recommend to full council. there is nothing else on the agenda. There are no other late items. So just a reminder then that procurement training will be on the 24th of November, and there will be the hybrid option of the training. So for members who do want to come in and do training in person, that is an option. And our next meeting is not till the 26th of January 2022, which seems an absolute age away. But I thank you for your attendance, and I will hopefully see you at the training session.